I stood in the hospital parking lot at 2 in the afternoon, clutching the paper that confirmed my mother was gone. My husband leaned against the car, phone in hand. Suddenly, he laughed. It was a short, dry sound, like he had just won a bet. "What is so funny?" I asked. He flinched, but not before I saw his screen flash with a text. Nothing. Just a stupid work joke. He lied. My name is Sienna Cole, and at 33 years old, I have spent the better part of a decade mastering the art of the spin. As a crisis communications manager at Merrowline Public Strategies in Denver, Colorado, I am the person corporations call when the world is burning down around them. I know how to bury a scandal, how to frame a disaster, and how to keep a straight face while the floor drops out from under my feet. I thought I was untouchable. I thought I knew how to manage every possible catastrophe until the one I could not control arrived in a hospital room on a Tuesday morning. My marriage to Logan Price was what I called stable enough to function. Logan is 35, a regional sales manager for Redwood Vale Therapeutics, and for years, we existed in a comfortable orbit of shared mortgages and polite dinners. He was the man who always remembered to pick up the dry cleaning but forgot how to look me in the eye when things got difficult. When my mother, Elaine, fell ill so suddenly, I expected him to be my anchor. Instead, he was like a ghost haunting the edges of my grief, standing beside me while his mind was clearly miles away. The breaking point happened in the hospital parking lot, just 20 minutes after I had signed the papers confirming my mother was gone. The Denver air was thin and biting, and my chest felt like it had been hollowed out with a rusted spoon. I walked toward our car, clutching a plastic bag of her final belongings. When I saw him, Logan was leaning against the passenger door, staring down at his phone. Then, he laughed. It was not a soft, sympathetic chuckle. It was a short, dry burst of genuine amusement, the kind of sound a man makes when he realizes he has just won a significant bet. My blood turned to ice. "What is so funny?" Logan, I asked, my voice coming out like a jagged blade. He flinched, his head snapping up as he shoved the phone into his pocket. The transition on his face was terrifyingly seamless. The smirk vanished, replaced by a mask of weary concern. "Nothing. Honestly, Sienna, I just remembered a ridiculous thing a colleague said earlier. My mind is it is everywhere right now." "I am so sorry," he said, reaching out to touch my shoulder. I stepped back, avoiding his hand. In the split second before he had flipped the screen away, I saw it. A notification banner from a contact I did not recognize. It was only 5 words, but they burned themselves into my retinas. Done. No one suspects anything. A work joke, I pressed, staring at the pocket where the phone was hidden. "You are laughing at a work joke while my mother is being wheeled into a morgue." "Sienna, please, you are exhausted. You are not thinking clearly," he replied, his voice dripping with that patronizing sweetness he used when he wanted me to stop asking questions. "Let's just get you home. You need to rest." I stayed silent during the drive, playing the role of the grieving, broken wife because that was the easiest thing to be. But inside, the crisis manager was waking up. I started running a mental timeline, a heat map of the last few months. I remembered the long business trips to Colorado Springs and Fort Collins that seemed to stretch longer than necessary. I remembered how he had suddenly turned off his personal GPS sharing, claiming he wanted to be more private, while simultaneously bragging about how his company tracked his car for transparency. I remembered the odd fluctuations in our joint savings account, tiny amounts, always under $200, disappearing like steam. I told myself, not today. Today belongs to my mother. I would not let his shadows darken the memory of her light. But the suspicion was a fire that had already caught the curtains. When we finally got back to our house, I retreated to the guest room with the box of her things. Logan went straight to the kitchen to make a call, his voice hushed and urgent. I sat on the edge of the bed and began to sift through the fragments of Elaine's life, a silk scarf, her favorite reading glasses, and a small, worn leather notebook. As I lifted the notebook, a cream-colored envelope slid out from between the pages. The handwriting on the front was shaky, written with a hand that had clearly been trembling. It was my name. I tore it open, my breath hitching in my throat. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a message that changed everything. Sienna, if you are reading this, please listen to me. I did not want to worry you while I was getting worse, but I have seen things I cannot explain. Do not trust Logan. He is not who you think he is. I stared at the words until they blurred. My husband had laughed in the parking lot of the hospital where she died, and my mother had spent her final moments trying to warn me about him. The storm was no longer coming. It was already here. The night was a suffocating blanket of silence as I sat on the floor of the guest room, the letter from my mother clutched in my trembling hands. The paper felt brittle, as if the weight of her words was too much for the fibers to hold. Her handwriting, usually so elegant, was a jagged mess of loops and slashes. She wrote about the months leading up to her death, about how Logan had been so eager to help her organize her property papers and the deed to her small cottage. He was so insistent. Sienna, the letter read. He asked about the life insurance policy and the bank balances over and over again. It made me feel like a ledger, not a human being. I felt unsafe in my own skin when he looked at me, my heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. But it was the second page that truly stopped my breath. Mom had quietly visited her bank 2 weeks before she was hospitalized. She had removed Logan as a secondary contact and changed the beneficiary of her savings account, which held nearly $25,000. She didn't leave it to me, either. She had signed it all over to a local community scholarship fund in Denver. Her reason was written in bold, desperate strokes, to ensure that no one views my death as a payout. When I mentioned the scholarship fund to Logan over a glass of lukewarm wine later that night, his face went rigid. For a second, the mask slipped, and I saw a flash of pure, unadulterated rage in his eyes. He quickly lowered his gaze, swirling the red liquid in his glass. Your mother was so incredibly selfless. Sienna, he whispered, though his knuckles were white as he gripped the stem of the glass. It is just such a shame. That money could have covered all the funeral costs and helped us secure our own future. It feels like a waste. Do you not think she wanted it to go to the students? Logan, I replied, my voice as cold as the ice in the fridge. The next morning, we drove to Lakewood to finalize the arrangements at the funeral home. The air inside the building was thick with the scent of lilies and artificial sympathy. While I sat with the director, Logan's phone buzzed incessantly. Every 10 minutes, he would stand up, offer a tight, apologetic smile, and step into the hallway. Through the glass door, I watched him. He wasn't acting like a man in mourning. His eyes were wide and bright, his gestures sharp and animated. He looked like a man who had just closed a multi-million-dollar deal and was waiting for the commission to hit his account. I pulled out my own phone and sent him a text. Who is so important that you can't sit with me for an hour. I saw him read it through the glass. He didn't come back in. He just typed a reply that popped up on my screen seconds later. Work, Sienna. Things are falling apart at the office because I am away. Don't please, just don't make a scene right now. My jaw tightened. After the meeting, while Logan was in the shower back at the house, I did something I had never done in our 7 years together. I went through his wallet. My hands didn't shake this time. I was in crisis mode now. I found it tucked behind a coffee punch card, a crumpled receipt from a garage in Arvada. It was dated 6 days ago, for a front-end alignment and a bumper buff-out. My mind raced back to that date. Logan had told me he was in Fort Collins for a regional sales dinner. Arvada was in the opposite direction. That night, the eve of the funeral. Logan slept with the heavy, rhythmic breathing of a man who had a perfectly clear conscience. He looked like a stone statue in the moonlight. I sat upright in the dark, staring at the ceiling, listening to the house creak. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard that dry, short laugh from the hospital parking lot. It sounded like a pane of glass shattering over and over again. I reached for my laptop and opened a hidden encrypted drive. I created a new folder, my fingers flying across the keys with professional precision. I titled it Elaine Timeline. I spent the next 4 hours scanning the letter, photographing the Arvada receipt, and mapping out the discrepancies in his travel logs. I was building a case, piece by piece, just like I did for my clients at Marrowline. As the sun began to peek over the mountains, a notification pinged on my tablet. It was an automated alert from my secondary email account. Unauthorized login attempt blocked. It read. I clicked on the details, my blood running cold. Someone had tried to reset my password from an unrecognized device. The location of the attempt, Arvada, Colorado. Someone was trying to scrub my digital life clean, and they were doing it while my mother's body was still waiting for the earth to claim it. The church in Golden was small, old, and smelled of wet wool and melting snow. Outside, the flakes were coming down in tiny, needle-like points, dusting the gravestones in a thin layer of white. I felt as though I were made of glass, held together by nothing but the stiff fabric of my black dress. Logan was right there, his hand clamped firmly over mine. He only squeezed my fingers when he noticed a neighbor or a distant relative looking our way. It was a performance, a carefully curated image of a grieving son-in-law, and I was just a prop in his play. When it came time for the eulogies, Logan didn't wait to be asked. He stood up with a somber, practiced gait and walked to the pulpit. He spoke of my mother's warmth and her unwavering spirit, but the words felt hollow. They were too polished, too rhythmic, like a sales pitch he had rehearsed in front of a mirror until he got the intonation just right. He wasn't talking about the woman who loved burnt toast and mystery novels. He was talking about a character in a script. As he finished his first few sentences, I heard the muffled, persistent buzz of a phone. It was coming from the pocket of his tailored charcoal vest. Logan bowed his head, making it look like he was overwhelmed by emotion, like he was pausing to catch his breath in prayer. But through my blurred vision, I saw his eyes darting downward. He wasn't praying. He was reading. Then it happened, right there, 3 feet away from the framed photograph of my mother's smiling face. Logan's lips curled. It was a tiny, sharp twitch of a smirk that ended in a soft, barely audible huff of a laugh. It was the same sound from the hospital parking lot, the sound of a man who had just received very good news. I felt the air leave my lungs as if someone had slammed a fist into my chest. I wanted to scream, to tear the microphone from his hand, but my professional training held me in place. I was a crisis manager. I observed. I waited. The heavy oak doors at the back of the church creaked open, letting in a gust of frigid air. Lydia Kessler walked in. She was the regional sales director for Redwood Vale Therapeutics, Logan's direct superior, and she looked entirely out of place. Her black coat was worth more than most people's cars in this town, and her presence was purely institutional. She didn't look like a mourner. She looked like an auditor. She approached me first, her handshake firm and dry. "I am deeply sorry for your loss, Sienna," she said, her voice low and efficient. She didn't linger. She turned immediately to Logan, who had just stepped down from the pulpit, his face flushed with the fake exertion of his speech. "Logan," Lydia said, her eyes boring into his. "We need to discuss the company car. There is an issue with the fleet logs, immediately after the service." Logan froze. It was only for a fraction of a second, a stutter in his breathing, but I saw the color drain from his neck. "Of course, Lydia, I didn't realize today would be the time for business," he stammered, his voice thin. "It isn't business," she snapped. "It is a necessity." Lydia walked to the front when the minister invited anyone else to say a few words. She stood where Logan had just been, her posture rigid. She spoke briefly about the community, but then her voice shifted, becoming sharp as a razor. Elaine was a woman who deserved the truth, Lydia said, looking directly at the congregation, then shifting her gaze to Logan. And on the night the accident happened on Interstate 70, I truly wish everyone had done the right thing. The room went silent. The only sound was the wind whistling against the stained glass. I felt my heart stop. My mother hadn't died of a simple medical complication. She had been the victim of a hit and run on the highway, an investigation that the police had told me was stalled due to a lack of evidence, and Lydia Kessler had just linked that night to Logan's company car. I looked at my husband. He wasn't looking at the casket. He was looking at the floor, his hands shaking so violently he had to shove them into his pockets. The work joke from the parking lot wasn't a joke at all. It was a confession. I returned to our house in a state of clinical detachment, while Logan collapsed onto the sofa, claiming his head was spinning from the grief and the pressure of Lydia's appearance. I went to the kitchen and brewed a pot of black coffee. My mind was no longer that of a mourning daughter. I was a crisis manager now, and my husband was the disaster I needed to contain. I waited until Logan's breathing turned heavy and rhythmic before I moved. I found his iPad on the nightstand, the screen glowing faintly with a notification. He had forgotten to log out of his corporate portal, a mistake born of arrogance. I didn't have to hack anything. I simply walked through the digital door he had left wide open. I started with the official police records I had saved on my phone. The hit and run had occurred on Interstate 70 near the Wheat Ridge exit at exactly 10:45 on the night my mother was supposedly resting before her condition plummeted. The surveillance footage was grainy, showing only a dark SUV with a distinct flicker in its left headlight. I opened the Redwood Vale Fleet Management app on the iPad. Logan had always bragged about how transparent his company was, tracking every mile for tax purposes. I pulled the logs for his assigned vehicle. At 10:45 that night, his GPS placed him on Interstate 70, traveling eastbound through Wheat Ridge. My breath caught in my throat. At 11 o'clock, the car stopped for exactly 12 minutes in a dark parking lot behind a closed garage in Arvada. Next, I pulled up the digital invoice from that same Arvada garage, the one I had found the receipt for in his wallet. The description was chilling. Emergency repair, front left fender, and headlight housing. There was a high-resolution photo attached to the file for insurance verification. The damage wasn't from a flying rock on the highway as he had claimed. The metal was pushed inward, the plastic cracked in a pattern that looked like a violent impact with something soft. My hands were ice cold as I opened our joint credit card app. There it was a charge for $98 paid to a local towing service at 1 a.m. on the night of the accident. Logan had labeled it as travel fuel in the memo line, a pathetic attempt to hide a trail that led straight to a crime scene. I checked his synced calendar. At 7 that evening, he had a block of time marked Regional Dinner Client, but there was no company name, no address, just a single capital letter L. The memory of his laugh in the hospital parking lot hit me like a physical blow. He wasn't laughing at a joke. He was laughing because my mother, the only person who might have been able to identify the car that struck her before she passed, was finally silent. If she was dead, the investigation would eventually go cold. The danger to his career and his freedom would vanish. You thought you won, didn't you? Logan, I whispered to the empty kitchen, my voice trembling with a rage so deep it felt like a fever. I went back to the iPad, digging deeper into the hidden folders. I found a deleted items bin that hadn't been emptied. Inside was a burst of photos taken that same night. One was a selfie Logan had taken in a hotel elevator mirror. He looked disheveled, his tie loosened, his eyes wide with a mix of adrenaline and fear, but it was what was behind him that shattered the last of my illusions. Reflected in the brass paneling of the elevator was a woman. She was blonde, her back to the camera, wearing a sharp, tailored blazer the color of dried blood. She wasn't me. She was the L from his calendar. I stared at the image of the woman in the red blazer until my eyes burned. Logan had turned my mother's life into a series of inconveniences he needed to erase. He had tried to turn her death into a clean slate for his lies. I closed the iPad and set it back on the nightstand with surgical precision. I looked at my husband, sleeping peacefully while the evidence of his betrayal sat inches from his head. I am going to find her. Blazer red, I hissed under my breath, my heart hardening into something unbreakable. And then I am going to make sure your name is the only thing people remember when they talk about the tragedy on Interstate 70. The name Maren Holt appeared on my screen like a glitch in a perfect system. I found her on LinkedIn within 10 minutes of searching the Redwood Vale employee directory. She was the sales training manager, a woman whose profile was a curated gallery of corporate virtue. Her recent posts were filled with buzzwords like professional ethics and unwavering accountability. Looking at her face blonde, smiling, perfectly poised, I felt a sick sense of irony. I scrolled through her social media footprints. The interactions between her and Logan were a trail of breadcrumbs, midnight likes on her photos, cryptic comments about the big project they were finishing, and inside jokes that felt like needles under my skin. I remembered her now. Logan had introduced her as just the training lead at the company holiday party last December. I had shaken her hand, oblivious to the fact that she was the woman in the red blazer reflected in a hotel mirror while my mother lay dying on the asphalt. I went back to Logan's computer, looking at the auto-forwarded emails I had missed earlier. The content had been scrubbed with surgical precision, but the headers remained. Incident report urgent. Fleet exception policy violation. Follow-up on I-70. He had deleted the bodies of the emails, but the titles told a story of a cover-up in progress. My hand shook as I dialed the number on the police report from the Wheat Ridge department. When a Detective Miller answered, I took a breath that felt like swallowing broken glass. Detective, my name is Sienna Cole. I am the daughter of Elaine Cole. I said, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. I am calling because I have reason to believe my husband, Logan Price, was involved in the accident. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. That is a very serious allegation. Mrs. Cole, Miller said cautiously. Do you have anything beyond a suspicion I have vehicle logs from his company car? I replied, my professional mask snapping back into place. I have a repair invoice from a garage in Arvada for front-end damage on the night of the hit and run. I have a timeline. If you have those documents, I need them, he said. I cannot make any promises, but data like that is exactly what we have been missing. Bring them to the station when you can. For the next 3 hours, I worked like I was preparing a high-stakes pitch for a Fortune 500 client. I organized the evidence into a digital war room, the GPS logs, the Arvada receipt, the hotel selfie, and the credit card transactions. I cross-referenced the times down to the minute. I was no longer a victim. I was the architect of his downfall. Logan must have felt the shift in the air. He started acting like the protagonist of a tragic romance. He brought home a massive bouquet of white lilies, my mother's favorite, which made me want to vomit, and spent the evening in the kitchen, making a complicated risotto he knew I liked. But every time his pocket buzzed, his eyes darted to his phone with the twitchy desperation of a man drowning in his own lies. Sienna, you have been so quiet, he said, leaning against the counter with a look of practiced concern. I am worried about you. This grief. It is eating you alive. I am just tired. Logan, I said, not looking up from my wine. It has been a long week. I know, he whispered, moving closer. That is why I talked to the team. There is a retreat this weekend at Juniper Summit Lodge. It is the quarterly meeting, but I told them I needed to bring you. We can stay in a private suite, get you some mountain air, away from the city, away from all this. I knew exactly what this was. Redwood Vale was holding their quarterly meeting. Maren Holt would be there. Lydia Kessler would be there. It was a chance for Logan to play the grieving husband in front of his bosses while whispering secrets to his mistress in the shadows of the pines. That sounds like exactly what I need, I said, forcing a small, broken smile. Really? He looked relieved, his shoulders dropping 2 inches. I just want to take care of you. Sienna, I promise. Everything is going to be fine. I know it is, I replied. I watched him walk away to check his phone again, his thumb flying across the screen. He thought he was leading me to a sanctuary where he could finish his cover-up. He didn't realize he was inviting the crisis manager directly into the heart of his conspiracy. Juniper Summit Lodge was a 3-hour drive away, and by the time we reached the top of that mountain, I would have every cord of his life ready to snap. I did not call a divorce attorney. Not yet. Divorce was a conclusion, and I was still in the middle of an investigation. Instead, I contacted a civil litigation specialist I had worked with during a corporate whistleblowing case 3 years ago. I needed to know how to preserve digital evidence so it would hold up in a court of law, not just in a shouting match. Following his advice, I spent the afternoon creating 3 separate backups of every file I had gathered. One went onto an encrypted external hard drive hidden in my gym bag, another into a secure cloud server, and the third into a physical folder tucked beneath the spare tire in my trunk. Once my perimeter was secure, I sent the email. I used my private account, the one Logan did not even know existed. The subject line was a cold, hard hook. Information regarding Logan Price's fleet vehicle and the I-70 incident. The body of the email was even shorter. I have the logs and the evidence you were looking for. I need 10 minutes of your time in private. Lydia Kessler responded in less than 4 minutes. Her reply was a reflection of her reputation: icy, efficient, and devoid of pleasantries. Bring the documents. Meet me in the hotel lobby at 6:10 p.m. on the day of check-in. Do not be late. I spent the rest of the evening preparing what I called my truth package. I designed it like a high-level pitch deck for a crisis client. 1 page was a summary of the incident. Another was a minute-by-minute timeline of the night my mother died. And the final section contained the side-by-side comparison of the GPS logs and the garage invoice. I was not just presenting a grievance. I was presenting a liability that Redwood Vale Therapeutics could not afford to ignore. The next morning, the drive to Juniper Summit Lodge felt like a journey into a different reality. Logan was unusually animated, his hands tapping a rhythm on the steering wheel as we wound our way into the snow-capped peaks of the Rockies. He looked like a man who had successfully buried a body and was now looking forward to the funeral feast. It will be good for us, Sienna, he said, his voice light and airy. Fresh air. A little luxury. We can finally put all the heavy stuff behind us. I sat in the passenger seat, my phone tucked into the door handle with the voice recorder running. I did not look at him. I looked at the sheer drops of the mountain passes. How much did the funeral home end up charging? He asked, trying to sound casual, though his eyes darted toward me for a split second. I was looking at the accounts. It must have been, what? 7,000. And did you ever find that insurance policy? The one for the 25,000, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. I had never told Logan about the amount of the policy. My mother had never discussed her finances with him while I was in the room. The insurance, I asked, my voice intentionally hollow and small. I haven't even looked for the paperwork yet. How did you know it was 25,000? Logan stiffened. He let out a forced, awkward laugh and gripped the steering wheel tighter. Oh, I must have just... I think your mom mentioned it once when I was helping her with the house papers. Or maybe I just guessed. It is a standard amount. Right, I suppose. It must be, I whispered. He continued to talk, rambling about his sales targets and how he hoped to impress Lydia during the retreat, but I stopped listening. The recording was capturing it all: the slip-ups, the greed, the casual dismissal of my mother's existence as anything other than a payout. I realized then that I did not need to scream at him. I did not need to throw the evidence in his face in the middle of a mountain road. I would let the system do the work. I would provide the spark, and then I would watch as HR, the fleet managers, the police, and a boss who hated being lied to turned his life into the very crisis I was famous for managing. "Are you okay, Sienna?" he asked, glancing over as we pulled into the grand entrance of the lodge. "You look, well, you look like you're a million miles away." "I am just thinking about the meeting tonight." "Logan," I said, finally turning to look him in the eye. "I have a feeling everything is about to change." Juniper Summit Lodge rose out of the jagged peaks like a monument to corporate excess. The architecture was all sharp angles and soaring glass, casting a warm, golden glow against the bruised purple of the twilight sky. Inside, the air was a curated mix of expensive cedar and the electric hum of high-stakes networking. Dozens of Redwood Vale employees moved through the lobby, their laughter echoing off the stone floors, creating a scene that felt more like a power auction than a professional retreat. Logan handled the check-in with a practiced ease that made the hair on my neck stand up. He didn't ask where the elevators were or what time breakfast was served. He moved toward the front desk with a familiarity that suggested he had walked these halls many times before. "The usual suite on the 4th floor?" he asked the receptionist, leaning over the counter with a charming wink. "Of course." "Mr. Price," she replied, sliding the key cards across the marble. "It is good to have you back." I stood 3 paces behind him, my coat still buttoned to my chin. My mother had never been here. I had never been here, but Logan was back. "I think the drive got to me." "Logan," I said, leaning slightly against a decorative pillar. "The altitude is making my head spin. I need to lie down for a bit before the welcome dinner." "Of course." "Honey," he said, his voice dripping with that sticky artificial concern. "Go up and rest. I will grab us some drinks and join you in half an hour. You just take all the time you need." I watched him disappear toward the lounge, and then I waited. I watched the grand clock above the fireplace. When the hands hit 6:10 precisely, I smoothed my hair and walked toward the far corner of the lobby, near the library entrance. Lydia Kessler was already there, seated in a high-backed leather chair. She didn't have a drink. She didn't have a smile. She just had a thin silver laptop open on her knees. I handed her the truth package without a word. She spent 8 minutes reading. She didn't flinch. She didn't gasp. She processed the GPS logs and the Arvada garage photos with the cold efficiency of a forensic accountant. When she finally looked up, her gray eyes were as hard as the mountains outside. "Do you have any idea what you have just handed me?" Sienna Lydia asked. Her voice was a low, dangerous hum. "You have given me enough evidence to dismantle an entire regional department. This isn't just a policy violation. I am a crisis manager." "Lydia," I replied, my voice steady, "I know exactly what a liability looks like." Lydia leaned forward, her fingers interlaced. "We were already looking into your husband. Internal audit found discrepancies in his expense reports, gas cards used for personal trips, forged client signatures. But this hit and run on Interstate 70. This moves us from a financial headache to a criminal catastrophe." He laughed, I said, the words slipping out before I could stop them. "He laughed in the hospital parking lot when he thought no one was looking. He laughed at the funeral." Lydia looked at me then, not as an executive, but as a woman who had clearly survived her own share of monsters. "If he laughed, Sienna, then he thinks you are too broken to fight back," she said. "He thinks his charm is a shield that you can't pierce." "He is wrong," I said. "Good," Lydia snapped, closing her laptop with a definitive click. "Because tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock, we are holding an unscheduled ethics and compliance meeting. I will have HR there, our legal counsel on video, and I have already contacted a local officer to be on standby for a vehicle inspection. We are going to call it a routine fleet audit. She paused, then added a detail that felt like a hot coal in my stomach. One more thing. Maren Holt is here. She isn't on the official company roster for this trip. She checked in using a private guest code provided by a senior manager. I think we both know whose code she used. I felt the last of my mercy evaporate. I'll be there at 8. When I let myself into our suite 20 minutes later, Logan was standing by the window, a glass of scotch in his hand. He turned, his face illuminated by the firelight. "There you are," he said, sounding suspiciously cheerful. "I thought you were sleeping. Where did you go?" I walked past him to the vanity and began taking off my jewelry, catching his reflection in the mirror. "I went to get some air." "Logan," I said, my voice as sharp as a scalpel. "I'm learning how to breathe again. I'm learning how to not drown while everyone else is laughing at a funeral." Logan's smile faltered, just for a second. "What? What is that supposed to mean?" "It means I'm tired of the silence," I said, turning to look at him for the first time without flinching. "Sleep well, Logan. Tomorrow is going to be a very long day." By the time the clock struck 9 that evening, the air in the lodge had shifted from celebratory to predatory. I could feel the eyes of Logan's colleagues on me as I moved through the great hall. It was a subtle, suffocating weight. Logan had been busy. He was leaning against the mahogany bar, a glass of bourbon in his hand, whispering to a group of senior sales leads. Whenever they looked at me, their expressions weren't filled with sympathy. They were filled with a clinical, distant pity. He was setting the stage, painting me as the grieving wife who had finally snapped under the pressure of loss. I walked toward the bar to get a glass of sparkling water, and that was when I saw her. Maren Holt was leaning against the brass rail, her blonde hair catching the light. She wasn't wearing the red blazer tonight, but the way she looked at me with a sharp, triumphant glint in her eyes told me exactly who she was. "I am so sorry for your loss." "Sienna," Maren said, her voice sounding like honey poured over a blade. She stepped closer, invading my personal space. "Logan told us you have been struggling. It is a tragedy when a sudden loss makes a person behave so unusually. You really should be upstairs resting." I felt the familiar coldness of a crisis professional settle over me. I reached into my pocket and silently engaged the voice recorder on my phone. "I'm doing exactly what I need to do." "Maren," I replied, keeping my voice level. Maren tilted her head, a patronizing smile playing on her lips. "Is that so? Because spreading rumors about company vehicles seems... well, it seems desperate. It was just a minor collision, really. A tiny accident on a dark road. It is hardly something to lose your mind over." My heart skipped a beat, but I didn't let my expression change. I hadn't mentioned a collision to anyone but Lydia and the police. "I never said anything about a collision." "Maren," I said softly, "how did you know it was on a dark road?" Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second, her throat working as she swallowed. I just assumed. Logan mentioned you were confused about things. Just get some sleep. Sienna." She turned and walked away, her heels clicking sharply on the stone. I stopped the recording and immediately forwarded the file to Lydia Kessler's private server. Minutes later, Logan intercepted me in the hallway leading to the elevators. He grabbed my arm, not hard enough to bruise, but with a frantic, trembling grip. He pulled me into a service alcove, his face pale and sweating despite the mountain chill. "What are you doing, Sienna?" he hissed, his voice a jagged whisper. "I've spent 7 years building this career. People are starting to talk. They think you're having a breakdown. Stop asking questions about the car. Stop. Please. Just stop before you ruin everything. You don't want to be a saboteur, do you? You don't want to be the woman who destroyed her husband's life because she couldn't handle her mother's death." I looked at him, really looked at him, and realized I felt nothing but a clean, sharp disgust. "I'm not a saboteur." "Logan," I said, my voice echoing in the small space. I am a crisis manager. I don't destroy things for fun. I verify the facts, and the facts are screaming your name. He let go of my arm as if I had burned him. You're crazy. I'm doing this for us. I'm protecting our future. I didn't answer. I walked past him and went to our room. Half an hour later, I received a notification from our joint bank app. Logan had moved $10,000, nearly 80% of our liquid savings, into a private account I couldn't access. A text followed immediately. I did this for your own good. Sienna, I can't have you spending impulsively while you're in this state. We will talk about it when you're stable. He thought he had cut off my air. He didn't know that 3 days ago. I had moved my personal commissions into a new account at a different bank. I picked up the phone, called my lawyer, and initiated a legal freeze on the remaining joint assets for suspected fraudulent activity. The final blow of the night came an hour later. A colleague from the PR department sent me a screenshot of a private Redwood Vale group chat. Logan had posted a photo of me standing alone in the lobby, looking pale and disheveled, with the caption, "My wife isn't doing well. She's hallucinating about the accident. Please ignore her if she approaches you. She needs professional help." It was a classic move. Discredit the witness. But Logan was arrogant. He didn't realize that the very lobby where he took that photo was covered by high-definition security cameras that, according to the logs I'd seen on Lydia's laptop, had recorded him meeting Marin Holt in a shadowed corner of the mezzanine just 20 minutes before. I sat at the small desk in the corner of the room, the mountains looming like giants outside the window. I opened my laptop and drafted a formal email to the Redwood Vale Human Resources Department, copying Lydia and the head of corporate compliance. I am in possession of evidence regarding significant legal and criminal risks involving a regional manager and a company fleet vehicle, I wrote, my fingers steady on the keys. I am requesting a formal opportunity to present this data during tomorrow's 8 o'clock meeting. For the safety of the firm's reputation, I suggest you grant it. I hit send. The trap was set. Now. All I had to do was wait for the morning light. The conference room at Juniper Summit Lodge felt less like a place for business and more like a sterile interrogation chamber. At exactly 8 o'clock in the morning, the heavy maple doors clicked shut, sealing out the cheerful sounds of the breakfast buffet. I sat at the far end of the long table, my back straight, my hands folded over a leather folder. Lydia Kessler sat at the head of the table, flanked by a representative from Human Resources and a man from the Compliance Department, in the corner. A local officer stood silently, a notebook in his hand, his presence a heavy anchor in the room. Logan walked in 5 minutes late. He didn't look like a man in trouble. He looked like a man who had spent the morning practicing his grieving husband face in the mirror. He offered a weary, courageous smile to the HR representative and pulled out a chair next to me, attempting to take my hand. I moved it to the table before he could touch me. He shot me a sharp, warning glance that said he was still in control. "Thank you for having me," Logan said, his voice dropping into a somber register. "I know my wife has been, well, she has been under an immense amount of pressure since her mother passed. I appreciate you taking the time to clear up these misunderstandings." The HR representative, a woman named Sarah, didn't smile back. "Mr. Price? We are here to review some discrepancies in the fleet management logs and your recent expense reports. Let's start with the fuel and maintenance charges from the night of the 18th. Logan leaned back, a picture of relaxed confidence. Yes. I believe there was a glitch in the reporting app that week. I already told my supervisor there were some mistakes, some entry errors. I've been so distracted with the funeral arrangements. It was just human error." Lydia leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "And were you also distracted when the company vehicle assigned to you was recorded traveling eastbound on Interstate 70 at 10:45 p.m. that same night? You reported you were at a client dinner in Fort Collins." Logan's smile didn't vanish, but it tightened at the corners. Yes. I believe there was a glitch in the reporting app that week. I already told my supervisor there were some Some entry errors. I've been so distracted with the funeral arrangements, it was just human error. Like I said, the GPS on those older SUVs is notoriously unreliable. I was in Fort Collins. Maybe someone borrowed my keys from the hotel valet. I'm a generous guy. Lydia, I don't keep track of every person who needs a lift. I opened my folder and slid 2 documents across the table. One was the Arvada garage invoice with the high-resolution photo of the front left damage. The other was a printed log of our joint credit card showing the towing fee from 1 o'clock that morning. You paid the towing service with our joint account. Logan, I said, my voice cutting through his lies like a cold wind. And the garage in Arvada has a time-stamped photo of the car. Are you saying the person who borrowed your car also used our private credit card? Logan's face turned a mottled shade of red. He slammed his hand on the table, the sound echoing in the silent room. You've been spying on me. Sienna, while your mother was dying, you were busy digging through my digital life. This is a disgusting invasion of my privacy. It is harassment. We have another question. Logan. Sarah from HR interrupted, her voice flat. What is your relationship with Marin Holt? Logan scoffed, a desperate sound. Marin, she's a colleague. We've worked on a few training modules together. I hardly know the woman outside of a few professional exchanges, a few work calls. My wife is just looking for someone to blame because she's grieving. Lydia nodded toward the door. Sarah stood up and opened it. Marin Holt walked in, her face as pale as the snow outside. She wouldn't look at Logan. She wouldn't look at me. She sat down at the far end of the table, her hands clutching her phone so tightly her knuckles were white. Logan looked at Marin, then at Lydia, and then he did something that chilled me to my core. He laughed. It was the same short, contemptuous laugh I had heard in the hospital parking lot, the sound of a man who believed he was still the smartest person in the room. Is this what we're doing? Logan asked, shaking his head. A stakeout, a setup. Listen, everyone is taking this way too far. It was a minor accident. Things happen. And let's be real for a second. My mother-in-law is, well, she is already gone. Why are we trying to destroy my life and a productive career over a ghost? It's over. She's dead. Let it go. The silence that followed was absolute. I felt the air leave my lungs. I looked at the officer in the corner, who had stopped writing. I looked at Lydia. Her gaze had moved from professional curiosity to a cold, unwavering hatred. Lydia spoke very slowly, her voice barely a whisper. You just confirmed exactly what I needed to hear. Logan. She turned to the officer. Officer, I think you have enough for your report now. And now, I would like to provide you with the additional documents we recovered from the car's internal dashcam cloud. Logan's laughter died in his throat. The knot was finally beginning to tighten. Lydia Kessler leaned forward, her presence suddenly filling the room with the weight of a judge delivering a final verdict. She didn't look at the documents I had brought. She looked at the ones she already had. You thought we were only looking at your receipts. Logan Lydia's voice was like a wire being pulled tight. Redwood Vale has been investigating you for fraud for 3 months. We have full access to the fleet data. We don't just see where the car goes. We see the maintenance logs, the impact sensors, and every frame of the high-definition cameras in the company parking lot. She slid a folder across the table toward the officer. It was a document Logan had clearly never seen. This is the detailed report the garage in Arvada sent directly to our fleet division for insurance clearance. Read the technician's notes. Officer, it says, and I quote, front-end damage consistent with an impact with a pedestrian or a soft object, not a stationary post or a rock. Logan's face went from a mottled red to a ghostly, translucent white. He looked at Marin, but she was staring at the floor, her body trembling. And then there is this, the HR representative said. Opening a printed email on the screen at the end of the table, we recovered a message from a deleted server sent from Marin Holt's private account to yours, Logan, at 2 in the morning on the night of the accident. It says, "Don't panic." Lydia doesn't have the authority to pull the Interstate 70 highway cameras. We're safe. The room felt like it was shrinking. The air was thick with the scent of a dying career and the cold reality of a prison cell. I reached into my bag and pulled out the cream-colored envelope my mother had left me. I placed it on the table, right next to the deed to her house, the one she had refused to sign. "This was the motive," I said, my voice steady and cold. "Greed. You wanted the house. You wanted the $25,000. And when she started asking questions about where you were really going on those business trips, she became a liability you needed to remove." Lydia turned her gaze back to Logan, her eyes flashing with a sharp, professional disdain. "You made a fatal mistake. Logan, you thought she was just a grieving wife you could manipulate with fake tears and flowers, but you forgot who she is. Sienna is a crisis communications manager. She knows exactly how to ensure the truth cannot be distorted, even by a liar as practiced as you." The officer stepped forward, his hand resting on the holster at his hip. "Mr. Price, based on the fleet data and the forensic report from the garage, I have sufficient grounds to detain you for questioning regarding the hit and run on Interstate 70. Stand up and put your hands behind your back." Logan bolted upright, his chair screeching against the floor. "No, this is a setup. She is lying. She is just trying to get revenge because I'm leaving her. This is all a lie." "No." "Logan," Lydia replied, her voice cutting through his panic. "She isn't looking for revenge. She is looking for accountability." She turned to the HR manager. "Redwood Vale is cooperating fully with the authorities. Terminate his contract immediately, revoke his system access, seize the company car, and cancel all corporate credit cards. Now!" Marin suddenly burst into loud, jagged sobs. It was just a second. We panicked. We were going to go back. I told him we should go back, but he said she was. He said she was already gone." Logan turned to me, his eyes wide and leaking tears that finally looked real, but only because they were born of terror. "Sienna, please, I am so sorry. I can fix this. We can fix this together. Please." I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just looked at him with the same detachment I used for a failed brand. "You laughed when my mother died because you thought no one would ever dare to speak," I said, my voice as final as a closing door. "Today, Logan, I am not the only one speaking." The officer grabbed Logan's arm and led him toward the door. As they exited the room, the heavy maple door swung shut with a dull thud, and the sound of the electronic lock clicking into place echoed like a period at the end of a very long, dark sentence. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to hear from you. Where are you listening to this story from today? Please leave a comment below so we can connect and share our thoughts on Sienna's journey for justice. If you enjoyed this tale of high-stakes revenge, please subscribe to the Mia Revenge Stories channel. Give this video a like and show your support by hitting the hype button so more people can hear this story. See you in the next one.